The air in the rag yard is cool and faintly sour, with the smell of damp linen rising from yesterday's bundles. You are up before sunrise, feeling the rough hemp cord in your hand as you unfasten the gate of a small Ottoman paper mill. Nothing here looks important at first, only heaps of worn cloth, a scale, a hook, and the pale dust of a working yard not yet busy. But this is where smooth paper begins, not in the vat or under the press, but in the quiet work of touching, shaking, and sorting what other households have thrown away. Your morning starts with simple judgments made by finger and nose, separating soft shirt linen from coarse sailcloth, cleaner scraps from those still holding grease, smoke, or mildew. In the half light, each bundle asks for patience, because a rag that seems ordinary can change the quality of a whole batch. Before the overseer arrives, there is time to make these choices slowly and to wonder whether the mill has promised finer paper than the neighborhood can really supply. As the first carts begin to creak towards the gate, the day's most humble work is only just opening. You set the hook beneath a sagging bale, drag it into the clearer patch of yard, and loosen the knot that held it through the night. The cloth inside is colder than the air, and wetter too, as if it gathered darkness into itself after sunset. Your hands know the first division before your eyes do. Linen to one side, hemp to another, cotton where there is any, and all doubtful scraps into a waiting heap for later. There are no tidy labels here, no merchant's truth to trust, only weave, softness, smell, and the faint sound a fabric makes when you snap it once between your fingers. One bundle gives you what you hoped for, old shirt fronts worn thin from washing, pale enough to imagine as writing paper. The next gives you trouble at once. Under a layer of domestic cloth, you find strips of sail canvas, stiff with salt and old tar, cut narrow so they looked finer while tied. You pause with one strip over your wrist, feeling its weight pull down, and you know this is the morning's first small deceit. If such scraps go unmarked into better stock, the beating room will feel it later, and the vat men will curse the fibers without ever seeing where they came from. So, you make your first choice before anyone else enters the yard. You split the pile again, more carefully now, taking time you can't really spare, building a separate stack for coarse stock that should never touch paper meant for clerks or copyists. The sky is beginning to pale over the roofs beyond the quarter wall, and the cocks somewhere behind the tannery have already called once. You should be moving faster. Instead, another bundle slows you. It comes from yesterday's late delivery, tied in blue cord, with a house mark dabbed in fading ink on the outer wrapping. The top layer looks decent enough, apron linen, tablecloth corners, a torn cuff, but lower down there is smoke trapped deep in the weave, then a waxy stain, then mildew in the fold where damp was left too long. You lift each piece to your face, not breathing too deeply, just enough to know whether the smell will survive washing. Some stains are ordinary life, lamp oil, soup, sweat, the dark polish of many hands. Others settle into the cloth and stay there. You have learned that a whole batch can carry one bad household with it, in a way no customer can name, and no overseer likes explained. So the finer stack grows more slowly than you need. The coarse stack rises faster. That, more than anything, troubles you. The mill has lately been selling paper with a smoother face, a cleaner color, and less specking than its yard usually earns. You know this because you hear the clerk speaking through the open office lattice when buyers come. He says the mill can supply writing sheets fit for account books, legal copies, and correspondence that must look orderly when folded. He says it with confidence. Out here in the yard, touching what the city has discarded, you know how much of that confidence rests on chance. A wheel creaks outside the gate, then another. The first donkey load has arrived earlier than usual, and with it comes the part of the morning that is no longer private. You pull the gate wider. A peddler stands there with one hand on the halter rope, the beast's panniers heavy with mixed sacks. He knows your face, and you know his manner. Cheerful before weighing, wounded after. He says the load is mostly household linen from respectable kitchens. You say nothing at first. You begin with the nearest sack, untie it, and reach in. What meets your hand is not kitchen linen. It is seam cuttings, patched undercloth, strips from work garments, and more sale fragments than any kitchen ever used. The peddler shrugs before you've spoken, as if to say cloth is cloth, and the mill can decide the rest. You spread several pieces over the weighing board so he can see why the price must change. A patched shirt back may still serve the pound, but not the higher grade. A sale fragment counts lower still because its fibers resist the kind of clean beating the better paper needs. He argues that washing will cure most sins. You answer that washing removes dirt, not nature. Linen broken down by too many years of scrubbing will never become what fresh shirt linen can become. He watches your hands more than your face. That is always how this goes. The truth of the yard lives in handling. You separate his load into 3 values, naming each one aloud, so there can be no later confusion. Good white linen, middling household cloth, and coarse rag for humbler paper. The peddler hears the 3rd category and clicks his tongue. He says another mill nearer the water has been less strict this month. There it is, the 2nd change of the morning and more dangerous than hidden sailcloth. Competition has come close enough to alter the gate talk. You keep your voice even, though the words settle heavily. If another yard is paying nearly fine linen rates for anything pale enough to pass in dim light, then today's buying cannot be done as it was last week. You weigh his better pieces again, more carefully than he expects, and lift out 2 shirt panels that are genuinely good. For those, you offer a little more. Not much, just enough that he notices. He notices at once. So does the servant girl who has come up behind him carrying a household bundle against her hip. The peddler nods slowly now, pretending this was always the bargain he had in mind. But you know what you've done. A small increase at the gate travels through a neighborhood faster than any written notice. If cleaner white rags bring better coin here this morning, more sellers will come to test the rumor by midday. That may help the mill later. It may also crowd the yard before there is room, water, or labor to absorb what arrives. Still, you mark the price in the rough tally board with a charcoal stroke, because the cloth in front of you deserves it. The servant girl steps forward next. Her bundle is wrapped in old curtain cloth, tied twice over, the knot neat and stubborn. She says it comes from a larger house uphill, where the mistress has ordered the rag chests cleared before the feast week. Bundles from such houses can be a blessing or a nuisance. Good linen often lives beside useless trimming, lace too worn to sell, children's shifts cut into rags, and table napkins ruined by grease. You cut the cord with your thumbnail and open the fold. At first glance, the cloth is finer than the peddler's. The weave is closer, the bleaching is better. Then you find the stones. Not large stones, not enough to insult you openly, but 2 smooth pieces tucked in the center where weight is hardest to challenge once all is tied again. You lift one into your palm, and the servant girl looks away toward the lane. Perhaps she knew. Perhaps someone in the kitchen knew. Perhaps no one thought it mattered much, so long as the bundle changed hands. You set the stones on the board between you. No accusation is needed. The scale says the rest. She asks for the better household rate anyway, because the cloth itself is decent, and because returning without a sale will mean questions. This is another choice. You can refuse the lot and lose both material and goodwill from a large house, or you can take it at a reduced price, making clear that the stones lowered trust more than weight. You choose the second path, because the linen is useful, and because a mill survives on relationships as much as on judgment. You lower the price enough that she winces, but not enough to send her away. She accepts. When she leaves, she glances back once, measuring whether she should return another day. You hope she will. You hope next time the bundle is cleaner in every sense. The yard is no longer quiet now. A second peddler has arrived, then a widow with a sack of worn shirts from lodgers, then a boy carrying apron scraps in a basket that smells faintly of onions. Each lot asks for the same sequence: untie, shake, spread, feel, grade, weigh, note. And each lot contains its own little argument. Buttons must be cut off before final processing. So a heap with many still attached is worth less work already waiting for your hands. Seams thick with thread hold dirt and slow cutting. Cloth stored damp may look pale but break under strain. You test that too, pulling gently, listening for the weak tear that tells you the fiber has given up its strength. The morning grows brighter, and with brightness comes speed. Sellers gather when they see others being paid. They linger when they think rates may rise with the crowd. The donkey loads stand nose to tail outside the gate, and the narrow lane begins to hold voices in a low, restless braid. You are still only one worker, with one scale and one pair of hands. So you simplify where you can, but not where it matters. Fine white linen gets its own growing pile beneath the awning, shaded from dust. Middling cloth goes near the wash cistern. Coarse hemp and sail fragments stay farthest from the inner door. You place them almost ceremonially apart, because once mixed, they ask to be tolerated, and tolerated cloth is the enemy of better paper. Near mid-morning, an intermediary you know only by his red sash and smooth beard steps to the front without carrying any sack at all. He does not sell rags himself. He arranges their movement, buys from poorer streets, and steers the bundles where payment seems best. Men like him do not waste words unless those words are worth coin. He watches you pay out for a small lot of shirt linen, then says, almost kindly, that the mill by the waterside has been offering another half measure for clean white pieces with little stain. He says it as if passing weather. You hear the pressure inside it. If he begins diverting his better bundles elsewhere, today's modest stack of fine material may be the best you see for weeks. You ask whether their terms hold for quantity or only for a few tempting purchases. He smiles, which answers nothing. Then he says sellers like certainty more than promises. That means he is testing whether your gait can match not only price, but steadiness. You look at the pile you've made since dawn. It is not enough. Not if the clerk upstairs continues speaking of smooth paper suitable for official hands. Not if the overseer expects cleaner sheets from a poorer quarter's rags. So you make the decision that will follow you through the rest of the day. For truly good linen, not merely pale cloth, but strong, well-washed shirt and sheet fragments, you raise the buying rate again, only a little. Enough to keep the best bundles from wandering. You tell the intermediary the higher rate applies only if the cloth is dry, cleanly cut, and free of hidden weight. He nods once, as if he expected this answer, then turns away to spread it without seeming to spread it. Cause follows cause very quickly in a yard like this. Within the next quarter hour, 2 more bundles arrive from houses that usually sell elsewhere. Then another peddler appears, carrying a sack that would not have been worth his walk under the old rate. The awning shades less ground than before. The wall beside the scale disappears behind cloth. Your charcoal tally marks darken the board faster than you like, and every dark mark is money the overseer did not plan to release so early. Still, the quality improves. You can feel it even blind. The linen is cooler, flatter, less furry at the torn edge. It has that worn softness that comes from honest use and repeated washing, not from rot. You begin setting aside a smaller inner stack within the fine pile itself, the best of the best, the cloth with long fibers and little stain, the kind that could disappear into a superior batch without apology. You do this almost without admitting it to yourself. Just a precaution, you think? Just order in the midst of crowding, but the act has meaning. You are already imagining a later stage of the day, when these choices might need defending. At last the clerk appears at the office threshold, not yet in the yard, but close enough to see the activity. He asks why the lane is clogged, and why the tally board has so many fresh marks before the sun stands high. You tell him the neighborhood has cloth to sell. That is true, but not complete. He narrows his eyes toward the fine pile, then toward the waiting sellers. He understands enough to know you have sweetened the gate. He says the overseer will want the numbers clean. You say the rags are cleaner too. For a moment, that is all. Then he tells you to keep separate count of the higher rate lots and not to let damp bundles into the covered storage. That at least, is permission by another name. The pressure shifts from buying to handling. Every sack accepted now must be moved inward before heat deepens and odors thicken. The wash area beyond the yard wall already holds yesterday's remainder, and there is only so much room for sorting tables, water tubs, and cutting benches. If the piles stand too long, cellar's dust becomes the mill's dust, and mixed grades begin to drift together in the confusion. So, as the bargaining loosens for the moment, you shoulder the first good bundle toward the inner workspace. It is heavier than it looked. Good linen often is, not because it weighs more by piece, but because it carries less emptiness. At the threshold, you look back once. The gate still stands open. A boy is coming up the lane with another armful white cloth wrapped in striped ticking. The yard you unlocked in silence before dawn has become a crowded mouth feeding the mill. And now the slower labor begins, the work that turns purchased scrap into something the beating room can trust. Inside, the air changes. The yard smelled of dust, rope, and old weather. The wash space smells of water, sour soak, lye soap, and cloth opened up after long folding. It is not pleasant exactly, but it is honest. On the first table you spread the higher grade rags one by one, not to admire them, but to discover what buying never fully shows. A shirt panel may hide wax at the seam. A tablecloth edge may hold old embroidery thread that must be cut away. A child's shift, though soft and pale, may be too frayed to yield strong fiber. You take a small knife and begin the repetitive work, trimming cords, removing hooks, clipping away thick hems, freeing each piece from anything that is not truly rag. A woman from the wash side joins you, sleeves pinned high, and together you work in the rhythm mills always return to when trade talk is done. Shake, spread, inspect, cut, sort again. What looked settled at the gate becomes uncertain on the table. One otherwise fine bundle reveals itself to be full of mended elbows and underarm patches darkened beyond saving. Another, bought cheaply from the widow, turns out to contain 3 broad strips of surprisingly good linen, hidden beneath coarser cloth. That small discovery steadies you. The higher buying has not been folly, at least not yet. Still, every gain has brought more volume. The benches fill. The corner baskets meant for buttons and cords overflow with bone, shell, and thread. And on the far side of the table sits one tightly tied household bundle you haven't opened yet, because its knot is intricate and its cloth wrapping cleaner than the rest. You reach for it at last, easing the cord free rather than cutting it. There are times when the way a bundle is tied tells you almost as much as what lies inside. This one opens with a faint scent of soap, which is never a bad sign. You fold back the wrapper, and for a moment the cloth inside seems almost too orderly for this room. The upper layer is made of narrow strips, cut cleanly from shirt fronts and sleeve lengths, stacked with unusual care. They are not new, of course, and not even close to new, but they have been washed so often that the linen lies soft and flat, with very little roughness at the edge. You lift one strip to the window light. Its threads are fine, even, and still long. That matters more than color alone. Pale cloth pleases the eye in the yard, but long fiber serves the mill. When linen is too worn, it tears into short, weak pieces in the later soaking and beating. When it has strength left, even in old age, it can still give a better sheet. You lay these first pieces on the inner stack you began making under the awning. Then you keep going. Beneath the shirt linen there is writing cloth, or what was once near it. Thin scraps, carefully cut from collars, cuffs, and garment panels that belonged to men who spent more time indoors than outdoors. There is less smoke in them, less kitchen grease, less of that ground-in city darkness that clings to hems and aprons. And then, deeper still, there is another sort of cloth entirely. Not household, not common wear, not table linen. These are trimmings from a scribe's or copyist's place, you think, because the pieces are narrow, clean, and strangely uniform, as if cut away during the making or altering of work garments meant to stay neat at the desk. Some hold faint marks in the weave, Not quite stains, but traces of black from old fingers and dried ink rubbed thin by washing. It is good cloth, better than most of what the yard has seen in several market days. You stop with both hands resting on the table. The woman beside you notices and glances over without pausing her own knife. She says nothing. She doesn't need to. Everyone in a mill can see when a bundle changes the room. You begin sorting more slowly now. Buttons, cords, hooks, and thick seams still have to come away, no matter how fine the cloth. The better the batch, the less forgiving the later work will be. A coarse paper can hide a small fault, a sheet meant for official hands cannot. You trim away a narrow seam with blue thread still in it, then another with wax darkening the fold. Even superior bundles ask for patience. That is one of the quiet lessons of the trade. Nothing enters the mill pure, not even the best gift of the day. As you work through the bundle, you notice that it was assembled by someone who understood value. The coarsest pieces are not mixed through at random. They were placed lower, apart, almost as if the seller wanted the finer linen seen first, but did not dare claim that the whole bundle deserved a high rate. There is honesty in that, or something near honesty. A way of saying, judge it carefully, but do not overlook the better half. You respect that more than smooth lies. At the bottom, wrapped in a torn length of plain cloth, there is a final packet of small pieces. For a moment you think they are useless, too narrow to matter. Then you unfold them and see what they are. Collar facings, cuff linings, strip after strip of close-woven, well-bleached linen from garments that once had to appear clean in front of clients, clerks, petitioners, or judges. These scraps are inconvenient in shape. They will take longer to cut into proper size for soaking. But the fiber is excellent. You can tell by the way the strips bend rather than crack. You can tell by the smoothness left after so many washings. You can tell by the fact that even the older stains sit lightly on the surface rather than deep in the body of the cloth. This is exactly the kind of material the clerk imagines whenever he promises fine paper upstairs. And it has come to your table in a single tight bundle. You ask the washwoman if she saw who brought it. She shakes her head. Perhaps one of the gate sellers, perhaps a servant from a house where no one bothered to explain the source, perhaps an intermediary who knew enough to keep quiet and let the scale decide. In the rag trade, origin often disappears. Only the cloth remains. Still, origin leaves traces. The careful knot, the orderly layers, the kind of stains present and the kinds absent. This bundle belonged to rooms where ink and starch mattered more than kitchen ash. You separate the best strips into a new pile, smaller than the fine pile and much smaller than the common stock. This one hardly deserves to be called a pile at all. It is a chosen handful. A quiet wager. The woman finally speaks. She asks whether you mean to hold those pieces back for the high vat. You don't answer at once. Outside, through the inner doorway, another load is being dragged in from the yard. A basket rattles with buttons. Someone laughs once, shortly, then goes back to work. In here, the sound is mostly cloth on wood, knife on seam, water moving in tubs. You say that the mill has promised better paper lately. She says the mill always promises. Then she shrugs and pulls shell buttons from a shirt strip, one by one, dropping them into the basket with a dry clicking sound. You smile despite yourself. She is not wrong. But promises, even airy ones, settle on hands like yours. That is how mills are built. The clerk speaks, the overseer nods, the customer pays, and down here, someone must decide whether a shirt cuff belongs with account book paper or wrapping stock. That is your part. Small, dirty, and suddenly heavier than it looked at dawn. So you make another decision without asking for permission first. The finest linen from this bundle will not be mixed into the ordinary good stock. You place it aside in a covered basket beneath a cleaner cloth where it will stay distinct until the next stage. If no chance comes to use it well, it can always be returned to the common fine lot later. But once mixed, it cannot be summoned back out. That is the constant rule of the day. Separation is easy only at the beginning. After that, Every step closes a door. The washing starts in earnest before midday heat reaches its worst. The tubs are not large enough for carelessness. Pieces must be wetted, loosened, and worked through in order, or else the cleaner cloth picks up what the dirtier cloth sheds. You help carry the first sorted loads toward the soaking area, where old stains begin their slow argument with water. Lye soap is used sparingly. Too much rough handling damages the fibers you spent all morning trying to protect. Too little leaves grease and soot that will later show as grey specks in the sheet, so the work settles into its own measured pace. You dip, lift, press, and rinse. Not as a laundress would for household pride, but as a paper worker does for future pulp. The purpose is not beauty now, it is readiness. A rag can still fail after washing. Sometimes only then do you see its true condition. A cloth that looked strong in a bundle may open at every weak spot when soaked. A stain that seemed mild may spread into a larger shadow. A fold left damp too long may reveal hidden rot. You watch for all of this. The better the incoming material, the more disappointing such discoveries feel. Yet disappointment is part of sorting too. It keeps the later rooms honest. One by one, the pieces from the special bundle prove themselves. They hold together, the washwater clouds, but not excessively. There is little grease, few deep stains. Almost no coarse thread hidden in hems. The strips are awkward to handle, but that is a forgivable nuisance. Their quality survives contact with water. That is what matters. You hang several over the rail to drain and study them in the stronger light now entering from the high opening. They are not dazzling white. Ottoman paper mills, like others of their age, often worked with what can be called good enough whiteness rather than impossible purity. But these scraps are clean in tone, softly pale, even. You imagine them reduced to pulp, then formed, pressed, sized, dried. Not luxurious paper, perhaps, not the paper of imperial rarities, but a better writing sheet than this mill usually coaxes from neighborhood cast-offs. That thought stays with you. It shouldn't, perhaps. A rag picker is supposed to sort, not dream ahead into the vat and loft. Still, work teaches imagination. You cannot touch fiber all morning without seeing the sheet it might become. By noon, the inner space has changed from crowded cloth market to disciplined disorder. Good rags are stacked by grade. Coarse stock weights apart. Useful trimmings have been cut down. Spoiled pieces have gone to the reject heap where they may serve for the roughest products, wiping or nothing at all. The floor is damp, the air is warmer, your fingers smell of old soap, wet linen, metal, and the faint, bitter tang of mildew disturbed from folds. You eat standing for a few minutes, if eating can be called that, a heel of bread. An olive, water from a jug kept in the shade. No one leaves far. Too much cloth is moving through the mill to trust the pace to hold without watching it. As you chew, the clerk comes through at last, this time with the overseer just behind him. The overseer is not a loud man. That makes the room attend to him more closely. He sees the graded stacks first, then the wash tubs, then the cutting bench. His eyes pause on the covered basket where you put the best linen. He asks, "What is in that one?" You answer plainly, "Fine shirt and writing linen, mostly from one household bundle, with some cleaner pieces from the higher rate gate lots." He asks why it is separate. You say because it deserves to be. The washwoman lowers her gaze to her work. The clerk pretends to study the tally scratches on a board by the wall. The overseer walks over and lifts the covering cloth himself. He touches one strip, then another. He rubs a damp edge between thumb and finger. You wait. There is no need to praise the material. Good linen introduces itself. At length he asks how much of it there is. Not enough for a full ordinary charge by itself, you tell him. Enough to improve one limited batch, if mixed carefully and not wasted. That last part matters. Every worker in the room hears the word wasted, even though no one reacts. Good material placed in the wrong product is also a form of waste. The overseer knows that. So do you. He asks where the rest of the day's better stock stands. You show him. He asks what you paid at the gate for the cleaner lots. You tell him that too. The clerk shifts his weight very slightly at that. The price was higher than expected, and all three of you know it. But the cloth on the table gives your choice a body. Without it, the higher tally would look merely indulgent. With it, the spending begins to resemble judgment. The overseer says nothing for several breaths. Then he tells you to finish washing and trimming everything before the afternoon charge is set. He does not order the special basket mixed back into the common pile. He does not forbid its use. That is enough. Permission in a mill often arrives as silence. After they leave, the room loosens again. The washwoman says very softly that you have placed your hand deeper into the day than before. You tell her the hand was already there. She laughs once through her nose, not unkindly. Then both of you return to work. The last part of early afternoon belongs to preparation. Soaked rags are drained, pressed lightly, and sent onward towards softening. Some mills relied more on long fermentation before beating. Some used combinations of soaking, rotting, washing again, and mechanical reduction according to custom, season, and available stock. In this small Ottoman mill, methods are practical rather than grand. The rags must be softened enough for the beating room to do its part without fighting knots and seams all day. That means your trimming cannot be lazy. Anything left thick now becomes a curse later. You sit with the knife and reduce broad pieces to workable sizes. There is a rhythm to it that can almost calm the mind. Fold, slice, turn, stack, pull away the hardened edge, fold again. Even the cloth resists in familiar ways. Old shirt linen cuts with a soft whisper. Hemp answers more stiffly. Canvas complains. Cotton, where there is cotton, feels different in the hand. Less crisp, sometimes less trustworthy, depending on how worn it is. You teach yourself all this through fingers before words. That is how obscure trades preserve knowledge. Not through treatises alone, but through repeated contact so steady it becomes instinct. A younger boy from the yard is sent in to carry the trimmed lots onward. He is curious about the special basket and keeps glancing toward it. At last he asks whether that cloth came from a palace. You tell him no. A palace would waste more and better. He grins at that. Then he asks why some white rags are worth much more than other white rags. It is a simple question, and you answer as simply as you can. Color is easy to see, you say. Strength is harder. A seller can wash cloth. He cannot wash weakness out of it. The boy nods, as if storing this away. Perhaps one day he will stand where you do now. Perhaps he will leave the mill and forget everything but the smell. Most workers pass through history like that. Still, for an afternoon, knowledge can be handed from one tired person to another, and that is enough. By the time the trimmed stock reaches the next room, the sound changes. The beating room announces itself before you enter. There is wood striking, water moving, wet fiber shifting under repeated force. Not thunderous, but steady. A laboring rhythm. The room is dimmer and more enclosed, built around the work rather than comfort. Here the rags stop looking like garments entirely. They begin to lose their former lives. This is where domestic cloth, work aprons, shirt cuffs, sail strips, napkins and collar facings surrender their identities and become matter for paper. Yet the memory of those identities remains in the quality. That is why your earlier choices matter so much. The beaters and stampers can only work with what they are given. Bad sorting cannot be corrected by effort alone. A man at the trough can pound longer, but he cannot pound rot into strength. He cannot pound grease into brightness. He cannot pound sailcloth into fine writing paper and call it a miracle. The room teaches limits in a patient way. You bring in the common good stock first. The workers there nod, lift, and add it according to the day's intended charges. Then you bring the special basket. This gets a different look. Not dramatic, just narrower eyes, a pause, a hand lifted from wet work to touch the top layer. One stamper asks where you found such cloth. You tell him it found the gate. He says the vat men will become proud if they hear of it. You say pride should wait for the sheets. That pleases him. He tips the basket slightly to inspect the lower pieces. The overseer enters again before any decision is made aloud. He has the habit of arriving at exactly the moment when private judgment is about to become public action. He asks whether the ordinary charge is ready. The stamper says yes. Then the overseer looks at the basket and asks whether there is enough there to sharpen the official batch. Official batch is not a formal name, not written on any board. It is simply how the better lot is spoken of when paper is hoped to end up in offices, merchant desks, records, petitions, correspondence. The paper that must lie flat, take ink cleanly, and not embarrass the man who ordered it. You say there is enough to improve it, but not enough to carry it alone. The overseer considers the tubs, the available stock, and the room's pace. He asks what mixture you propose. Your mouth goes dry for a moment. This is not usually a rag picker's place, to propose proportions in the beating room. But the question has been asked, and it would be foolish to pretend ignorance now. So you answer carefully. Use the chosen linen with the strongest of the day's good stock, you say, and leave out the doubtful household cloth that would ordinarily swell the amount. Make less, but make it better. The words hang in the room. Make less, but make it better. Simple words, costly words. The clerk is not here to hear them, but his book will hear them later. Yield matters. Sheets counted and sold matter. To reduce a batch in hope of quality is a quiet challenge to ordinary accounting. The overseer knows this better than anyone. He asks how many sheets you think the improved charge might lose. You answer that it depends on the vat, the forming, the pressing, the drying, and the mercy of all hands after yours. That draws a brief breath of amusement from one of the beaters. Not mockery, recognition. No one in a paper mill should trust predictions too deeply. Still, the overseer wants your estimate, so you give one, modestly. Fewer sheets, yes, but smoother ones, if all goes well. He looks at the linen again. Then he gives the instruction. The special basket is to go into the limited batch. Not the whole day's work, not every better charge, this one. And once that linen enters the wet mass, there will be no bringing it back. The stampers begin. The cloth disappears by handfuls into water and force. In another room, such an act might feel ceremonial. Here it feels practical, irreversible, and strangely intimate. All morning you touch these strips as remnants of lives already worn through. Now they are becoming something that no one looking at the final sheet will ever identify. A cuff becomes a page. A collar facing becomes part of a petition. A scribe's worn work shirt may return as blank paper for another scribe's hand. There is a comfort in that cycle. Not grand comfort, just the sort that belongs to trades where little is wasted, if labor can still redeem it. You stay near the trough longer than usual, watching the first reduction. The fibers loosen, edges blur, water clouds. The separate histories of the rags begin to vanish, and with them your power to correct anything. This is the stage where earlier attention either rewards or betrays you. A dark thread you fail to remove will not grow easier to find now. A waxy seam left in place will travel deeper into trouble. A good strip set aside in hope will either strengthen the charge or vanish into insignificance. No one says much while the first work proceeds. The room itself speaks enough. Wood falls, water slaps, wet mass shifts, hands move from basket to trough, from trough to inspection, from inspection back to work. It is one of the least celebrated sounds in human industry, this patient pounding of old cloth toward new usefulness. Yet whole shelves of books, ledgers of trade, letters of love, and registers of tax have depended on it. Paper begins in blows that are not angry. After some time, the overseer asks for a sample from the charge. A small wet clump is lifted out and pressed between fingers. He studies its texture. Then he passes it to you. The mass is not paper, not even close, but you can feel whether it is coarse or promising. This one feels good, not perfect. There are still a few harder bits that must go down further, but the body of it is even, and the better linen has clearly altered the mix. It has given the charge a smoother feel, a finer surrender. You try not to let relief show too openly. The overseer notices anyway. He doesn't scold you for the choice. He only asks whether you understand that a good feeling in the hand is not yet a good sheet. You say that you do, and you do know it, though knowing it does not quiet the small lift in your chest. In a paper mill, hope is always wet for a long time before it dries into proof. The special charge goes back under the stampers. The men working there fall into the same measured labor as before, but now each pause of inspection carries a little more attention. No one makes a ceremony of it. That would have seemed foolish. Still, the room has changed. A choice made in the rag yard now belongs to everyone who touches the batch. If the result is poor, the fault will travel backward through every hand. If it is good, the credit will travel upward faster than downward. That is the ordinary order of work. You remain close, because the overseer does not dismiss you. That, too, is unusual. A rag picker usually sends cloth inward, then returns to rougher duties. Today, your morning decisions have followed you into the mill's deeper rooms. The stampers lift and drop with their patient blows. Water darkens, then lightens, as the mass changes. The rag fibers that once held cuffs, hems, and shirt fronts are no longer separate enough for the eye to distinguish. Only texture remains. You begin to understand again what paper really is. Not just pulp, not just sheets, but a chain of refusals and allowances. This rag was too dirty. That one was still strong. This seam had to be cut away. Those strips were worth the higher price. Each judgment survives invisibly inside the final page. A younger vat helper comes in with a bucket and stands watching a moment too long. He asks, in the offhand way people use when they are truly curious, whether this is the same batch meant for the clerk's better buyers. One of the beaters tells him to fetch water and speak less. But the question hangs there. Everyone knows there is a better batch today. Workplaces carry such knowledge without needing it announced. You think about the path still ahead. Beating is only one surrender. Then there will be vat work, sheet forming, couching, pressing, separating, drying, perhaps sizing, perhaps burnishing, then counting, sorting, and all the small disappointments that appear when paper is asked to become paper. The overseer seems to think along similar lines. He says that if the charge holds together, you are to look in on the vat later, not to interfere, only to see what your cloth has become. It is a simple sentence. Yet in it, there is both permission and warning. See what it has become. Do not imagine that your work ends when the rags disappear. You nod. The room smells of wet fiber and old wood. There is also a faint metallic smell, though little metal is in the process itself. Perhaps it comes from tools, or from water standing long in vessels, or from the simple fact that labor has its own scent when enough hands share it. Your fingers, still raw from trimming seams, prickle in the damp air. You rub your thumb along the side of your forefinger where a thread cut you earlier. These are the quiet marks of the trade. No one notices them except the person carrying them home. As the charge is worked further, a few small dark points are found and lifted away. That matters. No batch, however carefully chosen, arrives free of all intrusion. A bit of thread, a stub of seam, a speck carried in from the floor or bench. The difference between ordinary paper and better paper is often the willingness to stop and remove what lesser work would ignore. You help with this when asked. Not because it is your station, but because the batch has become partly yours in the eyes of the room. A tiny knot is pressed flat and teased free. A blue filament, nearly missed, is pinched out and dropped aside. The stamper grunts approval once, almost too quietly to hear. He likes stock that behaves. Every room in a mill has its own form of gratitude. After another interval, the mass is judged ready to pass on. There is no trumpet note to mark the moment, only a practical shift. Containers are made ready. The pulp, now past remembering the garments it once was, is carried toward the vat room. You walk behind, not close enough to hinder, not far enough to seem detached. The corridor stones are damp underfoot. Somewhere above, a loft board creaks. The mill is a body today. full of internal movement. The vat room is warmer. Heat, moisture, and breath settle together there. The vat itself does not look grand from the outside. A buyer seeing only finished reams might imagine a more elegant birthplace for his paper. But paper is not born elegant. It is born in slurry and repetition. The vat man stands ready. He has the shoulders of someone who does the same controlled lift many times each day. His frame and molds rest near at hand. He asks what quality this charge is meant to serve. The overseer answers for him, better writing stock if it behaves. The vat man gives no sign of excitement. That is sensible. He has seen promising batches fail in forming, and humble ones surprise everyone. He tests the consistency himself. He sinks a hand tool, lifts, lets the mass slip back. He asks whether more ordinary stock was held out. The overseer says yes. Then he glances once toward you. Not long, just enough to show where that choice began. The vat man sees it. He gives you a brief look that is neither friendly nor hostile, simply measuring. He now knows that some rag picker's caution or ambition has altered his afternoon. He will decide later whether to be grateful. The first sheets are always a kind of question. Frame lowered, mold lifted, water draining, fibers settling where they choose, but not entirely by chance. Good pulp still needs skilled hands to spread itself evenly. Too much haste gives thickness at one end, thinness at another. A clotted charge leaves roughness. A weak one opens holes and pale weak places. The vat man's wrists make the fine correction, a small shake, a level hold. Then the forming begins to look less accidental. You stand where you can see without crowding. The first lifted surface catches the dim light from the high opening. Not yet paper in the dry sense that clerks love. Still, unmistakably a sheet in the making. Even now, before pressing, before drying, before finishing, the difference can be sensed. The surface is calmer. The fibers lie with less visible coarseness. There are fewer obvious specks. One corner shows a faint shadow, perhaps from a stubborn particle not fully dispersed. The vat man notices it too. He says nothing and lays the wet sheet to be couched. Another follows, then another. The rhythm takes over quickly. Dip, lift, drain, turn, lay down, return. The couched stack grows, each sheet parted by felt. The men handling them move with practiced care that always seems just a little slower than the eye expects. Paper-making rewards those who refuse to snatch. You find that calming, even under scrutiny. Nothing here can be bullied into refinement. The overseer stays longer than usual. He watches perhaps a dozen sheets pass. Then he asks for one to be inspected more closely. A fresh one is lifted. He studies the surface from different angles. The vat man points out a tiny inclusion near the edge. The overseer touches nothing. At last he says the body is good. Not splendid. Good. In a working mill, that word carries more weight than praise. Good means sellable. Good means defendable. Good means the batch may justify itself later when the tally book is opened. You let out breath you had not noticed. Holding. The vat man hears it. He gives half a smile, mostly with one cheek, and says that better rags save the arms as much as the reputation. That is a craftsman's compliment. If the pulp spreads well, the vat work is less of a fight. Your choices at the gate have reached even here, where cloth no longer looks like cloth. Through the next stretch of afternoon, you move between rooms. Somebody always needs an extra pair of hands. A stack shifted, a felt brought, a bundle checked against the earlier sorting. The common stock continues too, because the mill cannot devote itself entirely to one improved charge. Ordinary paper still keeps bread on tables. Coarser rags still become useful things. That contrast follows you. In one room, the better batch is handled with special care. In another, a rougher lot goes through for humbler paper, and no one minds a little more specking there. Not every page in the world must be smooth. Some are meant for wrapping spices, lining covers, or taking notes no one will preserve. Paper has ranks just as cloth had ranks before it. By mid-afternoon, the first formed sheets from the better charge are ready for pressing. This stage has its own quiet authority. Stacked wet, they look vulnerable. Pressed, they begin to claim shape. The pressman tightens the weight with patient turns, drawing water out and forcing closer contact between fibers. A poor sheet can be injured here. A good one can be helped. There is something deeply satisfying in watching excess water leave a thing. Not because dryness is perfection, but because uncertainty lessens. The sheets, after pressing, hold together with more confidence. They can be lifted apart more cleanly later. Their surfaces begin to reveal what the vat only hinted. You assist where told, usually in carrying and aligning. Labor that seems secondary often decides whether finer work survives the room. A stack set down crookedly can spoil edges. A careless hand can crease what hours have improved. No one speaks of this as philosophy. It is just the fact of mills. The humble tasks are always near the valuable ones. When the first pressed sheets are separated for hanging, the real test of your eye begins. Wet paper hides flaws kindly. As it thins toward air, little betrayals appear. A dark thread that vanished in the vat may show itself as a ghost line. An imperfectly cut seam can leave a stubborn roughness. Uneven fiber may reveal itself as mottling once light passes through. This is why you are sent upward later, when the loft air can judge what no trough ever fully tells. But before that, there is more to be done below. The drying loft is not yet ready for the next load. Ropes and lines must be checked. Earlier sheets from another batch must be shifted farther along where the air is drier. A boy is sent ahead. You follow after with part of the pressed stack. The stair is narrow. The smell changes as you climb. Below, everything was wet labor. Above there is air, wood, paper, and a sweetness almost like dust warmed by sunlight. The loft holds afternoon in a different way from the yard. Light comes in slanted through narrow openings, catching lint that turns lazily in the air. Lines stretch from beam to beam. Sheets hang in pale ranks, some still dark with damp, others nearing the color they will keep. There is little grandeur here either, just patient space. Yet for paper, this room is nearly a second birth. What was slurry becomes object. What was handled as mass becomes countable sheet. You help lift the first of the better batch into place. One by one they are separated and hung to dry. This requires gentleness and a kind of trust. A sheet too wet can sag into itself. A weak one can tear under its own modest weight. The better batch behaves well at first. That is a relief, but only the beginning. Once hung, the sheets have time to tell the truth more fully. You stand back as several rows settle on the line. In this light, they look almost silver. The vat man has sent up a note by way of the pressman, spoken, not written, that the charge took water evenly. That is good. The loft will now decide whether the evenness lasts. A woman who works the loft more often than you do begins inspecting the fresh hangings. She is quicker with her eyes than most men are with both eyes and fingers together. She moves along the row, lifting corners, peering through thinner patches toward the window. You follow a little behind, waiting for her first judgment. She stops at the third sheet and tilts it. A tiny dark fleck shows near the margin, no larger than a lentil split in half. She says this one may pass for a lower use if there are enough better ones beside it. That is how quality is often preserved, not by denying fault, but by downgrading it before fault spreads into reputation. You nod and mark it in your mind. 2 sheets later, she finds another inclusion, smaller still, then a run of clean ones. These make the whole row feel lighter. Smoother surface, more even tone. No obvious knotting. The chosen linen has not performed miracles, but it has done exactly what better material does when given a chance. It has narrowed the number of disappointments. That may sound like a modest victory. In a mill, modest victories feed everyone. More of the batch comes up. The inspection continues. You begin to see patterns. Pieces from the central part of the charge are strongest. Those nearer where ordinary stock had to be mixed in show a little more irregularity. Nothing shocking. Just enough to confirm what you already knew in your fingers. Good material improves the whole, but it cannot erase every weakness around it. It can only lend steadiness. The loft woman asks which bundle gave you the fine shirt and writing linen. You say you aren't certain who carried it through the gate. She says that if such cloth appears again, it should be watched from the start. You tell her that was your thought too. She grunts in agreement and keeps moving. That brief exchange matters. In work like this, status shifts first in the form of being listened to, not praised, not promoted, simply listened to. And as the lines fill with drying sheets, your morning's labor becomes visible in a way rough yard work seldom is. No one looking at tied bundles in the dawn lane would have imagined they held this pale hanging proof. You walk the rows again. The air in the loft moves slowly, enough to dry but not to whip. Windows are adjusted for the day's humidity. If the air is too close, sheets dry poorly and hold unwanted damp. If too much draft rushes through, edges curl or dry unevenly. Like all good repetitive work, loft tending is full of small corrections no customer ever sees. One shutter is eased wider, another is closed a finger's breadth. You begin removing the most visibly flawed sheets from the finer row before they fully declare themselves part of the count. This is a quiet decision, and a costly one. Every sheet you pull now reduces the official yield later, but each one left among the better stock risks lowering the whole impression. The temptation in all manufacturing is to let weak pieces hide among stronger ones. A careful mill resists that temptation if it can bear the loss. You take down the first flawed sheet and set it aside for humbler use. Then another, not many, just enough. Their defects are slight, yet real. A dark inclusion near center, a rough patch that will take sizing badly. A corner where fibers settled thinly. Ordinary buyers might accept them. A clerk choosing paper for official correspondence would notice. The loft woman watches you do this. She does not object. She only says that the account keeper will count every absence whether he sees the reason or not. You answer that the overseer can be shown the reason. She says, perhaps. Perhaps is the sound mills make when quality meets bookkeeping. The hours lengthen. Afternoon thins toward evening without any one clear moment of change. Work simply grows quieter. Voices drop. Movements become more economical. The first urgency of intake is gone. The middle urgency of beating and vat work is easing. Now the mill settles into judgment. What came in, what was worth the price, what became paper, what must be hidden in lower grades. What can be shown upstairs with confidence. You are sent back down briefly to compare the loft's removed sheets with remaining rough stock. This is not glamorous labor. Nothing in the day truly is. Still, it matters. A flawed better sheet should be sent where it does least harm and greatest use. Some will become ordinary writing paper. Some may be trimmed for smaller account slips. Some may never leave the mill except as wrapping or internal use. No one likes waste, especially not in a trade built on salvage. Below, the pressman asks how the special charge is showing. You tell him the truth. Mostly smooth, a cleaner tone. Some specks, but fewer than usual. He nods as if this confirms what his hands already felt under the press. Workers often know the answer before asking. They ask for the comfort of hearing that another room agrees. The overseer comes through again later, this time carrying no special expression at all. He asks to see the hanging rows. The loft woman leads him. You go too, because there is no point pretending distance from the batch now. He studies the sheets in silence. The light is weaker than before, but enough remains. He notes the smoother surface at once. Then he notices the pulled-aside defects. His gaze pauses there longer than on the clean run. That is natural. Fault attracts the eye even when quality exceeds expectation. He asks how many you removed. You tell him. He asks why those. You point out the inclusions and uneven spots. He lifts one against the light and sees what you saw. Then another. He does not say you were right. He only says that those should not be counted with the better lot. Again, in a mill, that is as good as agreement. The clerk is summoned. He comes upstairs reluctantly, as clerks often do when paper must be judged by hand instead of number. He dislikes ambiguity. The loft is full of it. A sheet can be almost good enough, nearly clean, not quite smooth, Better than last week, worse than hoped. Books prefer exact columns. Paper making often offers gradations instead. The overseer shows him the cleaner run, then the rejects from that run. He explains briefly that the higher payments at the gate secured material which improved this limited charge. The clerk hears the first half and frowns. He hears the second and recalculates. You can watch numbers moving in his mind even though no page lies open before him. He asks how many saleable fine sheets there will be after the downgraded pieces are removed. The overseer gives an estimate lower than the maximum possible count, higher than a poor batch would have yielded. The clerk presses his lips together. He is not pleased, but neither can he deny what hangs in front of him. That is the peculiar mercy of paper. A good sheet can argue for itself if someone bothers to look. The clerk touches one lightly. He rubs the surface with the back of a finger, not wanting to leave grease. Then he says the smoother face will matter if the government copyists truly come to inspect. There it is. The rumor you half heard earlier returns in a firmer shape. A possible buyer, or at least a possible judge, connected with official writing. Nothing is promised. Still, the better batch now has a future beyond this day's internal debate. The overseer asks where the rumor came from. The clerk says only that a bookseller mentioned it after speaking with a stationer's man. Such information travels through cities like wind through alleys, altered by every turn but often grounded in something real. The loft grows quieter after that. No one speaks for several moments. You look at the hanging sheets again, and they no longer seem merely the result of your private gamble. They may become evidence, not only of the mill's capacity, but of the value of stricter rag selection. That possibility changes the weight of the whole day. If the sheets impress no one, then higher gate prices will look careless. If they do impress, then the mill may demand more of the yard tomorrow and every day after. The clerk doesn't need to say more than that. Still, the sentence settles over the loft like a second layer of dust. A government copyist is not a grand official, not a vizier, not a man who enters with banners or escorts. But he belongs to the long, quiet machinery of written rule, and that means his opinion can travel farther than the rag yard ever will. You look at the hanging sheets again, and they seem changed simply by being imagined on another table. Not this beam-lined loft, not these damp boards, a desk somewhere cleaner, flatter, quieter, a hand testing the surface, a reed pen touching down, ink deciding whether the paper deserves trust. The clerk says the stationer's man may have exaggerated. He almost certainly has. Men who sell paper often like to enlarge tomorrow before it arrives. But exaggeration usually grows around some small truth. That is enough to trouble the room. The overseer asks when such a visitor might come. The clerk says, not today, and likely not tomorrow, but perhaps within the week if the bookseller's whisper came from the right shop. Within the week. That is both near and far in a mill. Near, because rag must be bought tomorrow and the next day. Far, because many things can happen to paper between loft and buyer. The overseer gives the hanging rows one final look. Then he says the cleaner sheets from this batch are to be kept together, counted carefully, and shown only after they are fully dry. No one argues. That instruction alone creates another category in the life of the mill. Not ordinary stock. Not hidden reserve. Paper waiting to be judged. You help mark the best hanging lines in your memory. There is no elegant system here, only habit and placement. Third row from the south opening, 2 lengths beyond the older account book lot. Flawed pieces already removed. The kind of map workers carry in their heads, because paper and cloth move faster than ink can always follow. By now the light has begun to flatten. The golden edge of afternoon is leaving the upper shutters. The loft woman's hands move as steadily as before, but slower. Not from laziness, from the way evening asks all labor to become deliberate. You begin carrying the downgraded sheets back toward the lower sorting space, where they can dry with humbler company. On the stair, each step gives a small complaint under your weight and the weight of damp paper. You think, not for the first time, how many trades depend on climbing. Up for drying, down for tallying, up again for checking. Work moving vertically through a building made for its own process. Below, the yard has changed shape from what it was at noon. The cellars are gone, the lane beyond the gate is open again. What remains are the traces of trade rather than trade itself. Scraps of cord on the ground, a smear of mud where a donkey stood too long, a charcoal tally dark with marks, bundles that were accepted now stacked in classes against the wall, each one awaiting tomorrow's soaking or later judgment. The wash side has quieted too. Water in the tubs is grey and still. A knife lies rinsed but not fully dry beside the board. The basket of removed buttons and hooks seems larger in evening light than it did earlier, as if the day's tiny interruptions had accumulated into a separate harvest. The clerk has already gone to his book. That means another part of the day has begun. Not the making of paper now, but the reckoning of what it cost. You know this before he calls for you. When he does, it is from the office threshold, with that careful tone clerks use when they mean to sound neutral and cannot entirely manage it. He asks for the rough tally board. You bring it in under your arm. The office is cooler than the workrooms, though it smells more shut in. Ink, dry wood, dust from paper already sold or copied from. A little oil from the lamp waiting to be lit. The clerk sits with his cleaner account pages open. His marks are thin and orderly where yours were broad and hurried. Trade always passes from rough hand to fine hand if enough money is involved. He runs his finger down the list of purchases and stops at the higher rate lots. Then he asks you to name each seller again, not because he did not hear before, but because evening is when uncertain memory becomes dangerous. You begin. The first peddler with the mixed sacks, and the donkey whose left pannier hung lower, the servant girl from the larger house uphill with the stones hidden in the bundle, the widow with shirts from lodgers, the red-sashed intermediaries' lots, some direct, some likely passed through other hands, the boy with apron scraps that smelled of onions. You identify each as best you can, attaching face to cloth and cloth to price. The clerk writes without haste. Now and then he asks whether a given lot was mostly linen or only partly so, whether it came in dry, whether the hidden weight was discovered before or after bargain, whether the increase you offered was spoken aloud for all to hear, or only for certain bundles judged superior. These questions matter because they create precedent. If the higher price was private, it can remain flexible. If public, the lane will remember it as law by morning. You answer honestly, though honesty here tightens the line around your own choices. Some heard it, some saw it. Word will travel. The clerk sighs through his nose and writes that too, though not in those words. His pen turns rumour into expense. Then he asks what quantity of the best linen was taken out of common stock for the improved batch. This number is harder. Not because you don't know roughly, but because rough knowledge sits uneasily beside a ledger. You estimate by weight, by basket fullness, by memory of the cut pieces, and what remained. The clerk asks whether the overseer authorized the separation before or after washing. You say, after seeing the cloth, though, the first act of holding it apart was yours. That answer is true enough, and he accepts it without lifting his eyes. There are many kinds of truth in a workshop. Some belong to sequence, some to responsibility, some to survival. At length the overseer comes in as well. He stands rather than sits. That changes the room. The clerk reads back the purchases in a low voice. When he reaches the higher rate lots, he pauses. The overseer asks only one question at first. How much above expectation did the buying run? The clerk gives the sum. It is not ruinous, it is not small. Enough to notice. Enough that, on a day without visible improvement upstairs, the extra spending would feel foolish. The overseer turns to you and asks whether you would have paid the same if no rival mill were mentioned. You consider that. Then you answer no, not for all of it, only for the very cleanest linen. Competition sharpened the gate, but the cloth itself justified part of the rise. The overseer nods once. He is not asking for eloquence, only cause. The clerk, still writing, asks whether tomorrow's buying is to continue at the same higher rate. That question hangs longer than the others, because it reaches beyond this day. The overseer does not answer immediately. He looks instead toward the yard, visible through the open office lattice. The light there is now dim enough that the piled bundles seem almost colorless. At last he says that tomorrow's better rate applies only to dry white linen of proven strength, and only in smaller quantity unless the supply is truly exceptional. That is a narrowing, not a retreat. The clerk writes it carefully. You listen just as carefully because tomorrow's dawn has already begun to take shape inside that sentence. Smaller quantity, proven strength, truly exceptional. The lane will test every word of it. The overseer then asks to see the rejected pieces from the improved batch. You fetch them from below the stair where you had placed them. He inspects them one by one under the window's last useful light. The flaws are not severe, which oddly makes the exercise more serious. If they were terrible, the decision would be easy, but these are only slightly marred. Exactly the kind of sheets a careless mill might pass upward and hope no buyer minds. He lifts one with a dark fleck near center, then one with slight unevenness. He asks whether these came from the special linen or from the ordinary stock around it. You say no, one can prove it now, but the pattern suggests the mixed edges of the charge, rather than the chosen heart of it. Again he nods. Again that small nod is the nearest thing to approval likely to appear. The clerk asks whether these lesser sheets should still be entered as saleable. The overseer says yes, but not in the better line. No deception. That phrase is short. It reaches farther than the ledger. The day, you realize, has been a chain of hidden temptations toward deception. Sailcloth tucked under domestic linen, stones hidden for weight, pale but weak cloth presented as worthy, the impulse to leave flawed sheets among cleaner ones, the ease of claiming confusion over raised prices. And now in evening, the choice between honest classification and a few extra coins. No deception. It is a stern rule, but also a comforting one. Simple rules reduce the noise in tired minds. The clerk finishes entering the purchases and begins comparing your yard marks against actual material remaining. This is slower work than it sounds. A tally is not a bundle. A bundle changes shape once opened, trimmed, washed, and partly rejected, so the evening reckoning depends on memory as much as measurement. How much was useless trimming? How much turned to common stock? How much went into the improved charge? How much hangs now in the loft and cannot yet be counted by dry sheet? The clerk dislikes such living numbers. He asks for precision where process offers only intervals. Still, together, you trace the day. This pile was morning's fine lot before washing. This smaller amount is what remained fit after cutting and inspection. That covered basket was separated and then mostly committed to the better charge. These coarse bundles came in at lower rate and still weight intact. Those damp pieces near the cistern must not be credited fully until they dry and are proven sound. The overseer listens more than he speaks. When he does speak, it is usually to simplify. This pile into that class. These pieces kept apart. Those bundles covered before nightfall. He has done this often enough to know that evening needs order more than debate. At one point the clerk asks whether the hidden stones from the servant girl's bundle should be noted against the house source, in case future lots arrive from there. The overseer says yes, not as accusation, as caution. That too feels characteristic of the trade. You remember not from spite, but from necessity. The city enters the mill in fragments, and each fragment teaches something about where it came from. A kitchen quarter gives grease. A lodging house gives overwashed shirts. A sailor's corner gives tar and canvas. A copyist's neighborhood gives cleaner cuffs and ink-thinned collars. A wealthy house gives mixed blessings and occasional smooth deceit. By the time the book is closed for the moment, dusk has nearly finished outside. The lamp is lit in the office. Its light is small and yellow, gentler than day but less forgiving in other ways. Paper under lamplight shows texture differently. So do faces. The clerk looks more tired now, the overseer more inward. You feel the day in your wrists and the base of your thumb where cords bit early this morning. But there is still yard work to do before any meal can be thought of. Night air is dangerous to rag left carelessly. Damp creeps in, mildew begins quietly. Fine linen can lose some of the very advantage you paid extra to secure if it sleeps badly. So you go back out with coverings and cord. The yard at evening is almost another place. Without cellars and argument, it returns to what it was before dawn, a waiting ground. Yet now everything in it carries the heat and handling of the day. The remaining bundles must be restacked according to tomorrow's likely order. Best cloth nearest the inner door, but not where drip from the eaves can find it. Coarse stock farther off, because its urgency is lower. Doubtful damp bundles set where air can still move around them, but under cover enough to protect them from dew. You do this in near silence. Another worker helps for a while, then leaves to wash up. The rope in your hand feels rougher than it did this morning. Your palms are more tender. The bundles themselves feel warmer at first from holding the day's trapped heat, then cooler as evening settles in. You test several by touch at the cut edge. Still too damp. These must not be closed too tightly. One of the improved rate lots from midday turns out to have more hidden moisture than you liked. Not soaked, but not safely dry either. This is exactly the sort of thing that can undo a clever purchase. You loosen it and spread part of it on a slatted rack under the awning, where night air can pass but direct damp won't fall. Another worker passing by says, "You'll be blamed if it dries poorly there." You answer that you'll be blamed either way if mildew takes it in a closed bundle. He shrugs. That is the shape of much workshop wisdom. Blame moves more easily than certainty. The gate itself must be checked before bar. Not just latched, but cleared of obstacles and swept enough that tomorrow's first sellers do not step into a yard that looks careless. Trade begins before a word is spoken. A clean threshold suggests fairness. A disorderly one suggests confusion, and confusion always invites sharper bargaining from the lane. So you stoop with the broom and pull out scraps of twine, grit, and one small shell button overlooked earlier. The movement is repetitive and pleasing after the finer strain of inspection. Broom on packed ground, push, gather, lift, again. A city quarter beyond the wall continues its evening life. Cooking smoke, a call from farther off, footsteps in the lane, a child briefly laughing, then gone. But inside the gate, the mill narrows again to tools returning to their places. The scale is wiped down, weights set back in order, hook hung on its peg, charcoal stub placed in a dry niche by the tally board. These acts matter more than they seem to an outsider. A trade that begins in worn cloth must create dignity through arrangement. If tools lie where they fell, work feels lower. If tools rest where they belong, even rag sorting becomes a craft. When the clerk comes back out once more, he carries the cleaner ledger under his arm and the rough board in his other hand. He asks you to stand with him by the remaining stacks. This is the final comparison. Book against matter. Not exact, never exact, but close enough that tomorrow no one need begin with suspicion. You walk him through the classes again. Fine dry linen purchased dearer. Good household cloth at ordinary rate. Coarse mixed rag. Questionable damp lots held apart. Trimmed uselessness already discarded. Special stock mostly consumed in the improved charge now hanging upstairs. He repeats these back in his own language, the language of entries and expected yield. You answer in the language of touch and process. Between the two of you, something like the day's truth takes shape. Then comes the question you knew would return. Was the extra payment worth it? This time the clerk asks it less sharply than before. Perhaps because he has seen the loft. Perhaps because he wants to hear how you would argue it. You say that without the better gate rate, the finest household bundle might never have been brought here, or if brought, might have been sold elsewhere next time. You say the improved charge upstairs exists because the yard acted before the rival mill set the neighborhood's habit. You say the extra spending bought not just cloth, but choice. Choice of grade. Choice of what to hold apart. Choice of whether the mill could still claim cleaner paper honestly. The clerk listens. He does not wholly agree. He is a man who trusts evidence already dried, more than promises still hanging. But he cannot dismiss what he saw under the loft window. He says the accounts will bear the strain this once. This once. Not triumph, not pardon, just continuation with memory attached. The overseer joins you at the end of that exchange, as if he had been waiting nearby to hear where the blame would settle in one direction. He asks the clerk whether the totals are tolerable. The clerk says yes. With scrutiny tomorrow, the overseer asks you whether you understand that this means the gate will be watched more closely. You say you do, and you do. A softer burden can still be a burden. The day's slight gain in trust has a sharp edge hidden inside it. If tomorrow's buying is careless, today's defense will look like luck. If tomorrow's buying is too timid, the improved batch will remain an isolated accident. The yard has given you no promotion, only more visible consequences. There is a strange dignity in that. Many workers crave to be unseen until failure comes. But some trades, once noticed, reveal what they were always carrying. Your work was always shaping the vat, whether anyone admitted it or not. Now the mill has had to admit it. Night draws in fully while these thoughts pass. The clerk returns inside. The overseer bars the gate at last. The sound of the wooden beams settling into place is satisfying in the body. A day's opening undone. The lane left outside. Within the yard, the remaining cloth belongs to tomorrow. That belonging feels almost tender. Not ownership exactly. Custody. You stand a moment after the gate is shut. The air has cooled. The sourness of damp rag is softer at night, mingled now with wood smoke drifting from nearby cooking fires. Above, a few of the loft shutters still show faint light where someone makes one last check on the hanging rows. Then those too begin to dim. There is still the matter of your hands. At the wash trough, with cleaner water now, you rub out the day's grime as best you can. Not all of it leaves. Lye has dried the skin. Thread cuts show white for a moment, then pink again. Under one nail, a grey line remains, the kind that stays until work wears it away on its own. You rinse your face. The water is cool enough to wake you slightly when you'd rather be drifting. Then you wipe with a rough cloth and gather your small things. A cord you prefer to use yourself. A knife wrapped in scrap. Nothing impressive. The possessions of a worker whose trade begins with other people's discarded fabric. The mill does not send you home grandly. No one does. You step out by a smaller side passage once the main gate is secure. The street beyond is narrow and uneven, holding the last of the evening traffic. A man carrying bread. Two boys arguing quietly over something unseen. A donkey with empty panniers moving homeward with more patience than speed. Your body notices food before your mind chooses it. There is a corner not far away where workers from several nearby trades sometimes eat plain evening meals. Nothing festive. Stew when there is stew. Beans when there are beans. Bread always if the oven was kind. You go there because the day has emptied you in small pieces and because eating alone, after rag work, can make a room smell too strongly of the mill. At the low table, you sit with your hands wrapped loosely around a bowl before the first spoonful. Heat rises from it. Lentils tonight, with a little onion and oil. You tear bread and dip. The first mouthful tells you how long it has been since noon. Around you, other people speak in the tired, measured way evening creates. A coper mentioning warped staves. A porter complaining softly about a cartwheel. Someone from the dye quarter smelling faintly of mordant and damp wool. No one asks for a speech from the rag picker. That is a comfort. Still, one man who has seen you at the mill asks whether trade was heavy today. You say yes. He asks whether the paper people are thriving. You say they are busy. That is the most accurate answer you can offer. Thriving belongs to owners and books. Busy belongs to hands. You eat slowly because there is no use hurrying the part of the evening that asks nothing more from your hands. The lentils are soft, the bread a little firm at the edge, and both taste better than they would have at midday, when work was still pulling at your attention. A man from the tannery bench nearby says paper workers are fortunate, because cloth at least begins clean in some households. You look at him, then at the stains dark in his cuffs, and say that cloth only begins clean if someone else was rich enough to keep it that way. He laughs once. Then he goes back to his bowl. That small exchange stays with you because it says something true about the trade. You work at the end of many former kinds of order. A shirt had to be made, worn, washed, mended, worn again, cut down, sold, and carried before it ever reached your hook. By the time it touches the mill yard, it has already lived a long, obedient life. Only then does it begin serving paper. You finish eating and wipe the bowl with the last piece of bread. There is a comfort in plain food after a day of complicated judgment. The food asks little. The cloth asked everything. Outside, the street is darkened further, and the sounds of the quarter are thinning into the separate noises that remain after trade. A shutter closing, a pan set down, a donkey's tack creaking as it turns into some smaller lane. You walk back toward your lodging with the day's fibers still lingering in your fingers, as if linen has a memory that can travel with skin. It often feels that way after long sorting. You are no longer touching the cloth, yet your hands continue to think in textures. This one smooth and cool, that one furry and breaking, this seam thick with old thread. That strip clean enough to risk on finer paper. It is almost like reviewing a map, not of streets, but of where. A city in scraps. The room where you sleep is small, and tonight it holds the mild trapped heat of the day. You set down your knife and cord in their places first. That too is habit. Tools rest before the worker does. Then you sit on the edge of the bedding and rub your thumb into the base of the opposite hand, where the scale rope pressed. The soreness is not sharp. It is deeper than that. A full tiredness, settled into the joints and pads of the fingers. This is the kind of ache repetitive work leaves behind. Not dramatic, steady. The sort that tells you exactly what you spent yourself doing. You think again of the hanging sheets in the loft, not because you are trying to relive the day, but because unfinished work has a way of occupying the room even after you leave it. They are there still, moving almost not at all in the high dark air. The cleaner run held apart, the downgraded pieces already named for humbler futures, the official count not yet fixed. And over all of that, the small rumor of a government copyist who may or may not come. A rumor can be light as dust in the afternoon. At night, it gains weight, not because it grows more certain, but because the mind has fewer tasks with which to defend itself. You lie down, and for a while you do not sleep. You are too tired for rest to come quickly. That is one of the quieter cruelties of manual trades. The body is ready to stop before the mind has finished sorting. You think of the gate tomorrow. If the lane has already learned that cleaner white rags brought better money, then morning will not resemble this morning exactly. There may be more hopeful bundles. There may also be more carefully hidden stones, more washed weakness, more cloth arranged to flatter itself in dim light. A new rate teaches sellers almost as quickly as it teaches buyers. That is why the overseer narrowed the terms. Smaller quantity, proven strength, truly exceptional, simple phrases, but each one will have to be translated by your hands before dawn. At last, sleep comes in pieces. Not a clear fall into darkness, but a gradual softening. The mill returns in fragments. The sound of the press turning, a row of sheets against loft light, the red sash of the intermediary, the feel of that unusually fine collar linen bending instead of cracking. Then all of it drifts. When you wake again, it is not because the room has become bright. It has not. It is because your body has learned the hour too well. Before dawn has fully declared itself, you are already up, already tying cord at your waist, already washing sleep from your face with water that feels cooler than last night. There is no grand beginning to a second day. Only continuation. The street outside is quieter than it was yesterday, but not empty. Workers who start early always recognize one another by pace rather than face. You pass a baker's helper carrying wood, a porter with an empty back frame, someone from the baths moving with folded cloth over one shoulder. The city opens by trades, one narrow hour at a time. At the mill, the barred gate holds the night's damp on its wood. You lift the beam, open the leaves, and the yard receives you again. The bundles under cover have kept fairly well. The lot you loosened on the slatted rack is drier now, though not perfect. That was the right choice. A closed bundle would have soured by morning. You touch the exposed edges and feel only faint coolness, not the clammy resistance of hidden wet. Already, before the sun, one small worry has been answered. You walk the stacks in order. This becomes the first duty of each day after a heavy buying day. Not buying, but remembering what remains from yesterday, what must move first, what cannot wait another cycle of damp and delay. The best fine linen still in reserve is little enough now because so much went into the improved charge. The common good stock is stronger. The coarse pile stronger still. That is the reality the Loft's pale promise does not erase. A mill cannot live on one fortunate bundle. It must eat through ordinary cloth day after day. You check the tally board and the notes left by the clerk in a neater hand, on a scrap tucked beneath a weight. Better rate restricted. No damp lots under awning. Separate count continued. The words are plain. Even so, they feel like eyes in the yard. Yesterday you acted first and explained after. Today every purchase will arrive with memory attached. You are not offended by that. It is simply the next shape of responsibility. The first arrivals come later than yesterday, which gives you time to move several bundles inward and clear space by the gate. That matters. A crowded threshold makes all judgment sloppier. You drag coarse stock to the far side. Set fine storage more tightly. Wipe the scale again. Lay out the weights. These motions are familiar enough to calm you. A well-ordered yard improves the worker before it improves the work. Soon the lane begins to stir. The first woman to arrive is not one you know well. She carries a wrapped parcel in both arms rather than balancing it on her hip, which suggests the cloth matters to her. She says she heard the mill is taking clean white rag at a better price, so the news has already spread, not as rumor now, as invitation. You tell her the mill will pay fairly for strong dry linen and less for anything merely pale. She nods too quickly. That usually means disappointment is waiting inside the knot. The bundle opens to reveal decent cloth on top, a few broad shirt pieces, some napkin lengths, then lower down, fabric so thin from washing that your fingers nearly find holes before your eyes do. That is the morning's first lesson returning exactly as expected. Color is easy to display. Strength is harder. You show her the difference by holding one good strip and one failing strip side by side, bending them over your fingers. One folds with body, the other goes limp, then opens along an old, weak line. She does not argue much. Perhaps she already knew. Perhaps she hoped the dawn light would favor her. You buy the better half and reject the worst. This takes longer than simple weighing, but it establishes the terms in a way the lane can understand if word travels back with her. Better pay is still strict pay. That message matters more than any single bargain. The next seller is sharper. An old peddler with a patched cap and a sack that smells heavily of soap. Too heavily. You untie it and find cloth that has been washed recently, perhaps only yesterday, and spread to look fresher than it is. Strong smell can flatter weak material for a moment. It suggests cleanliness before you have tested the fiber. He watches your face carefully. You say nothing while you sort. Several pieces are usable. Several more have been scrubbed so often they have lost their future. He protests when you lower the rate on those. You answer by pulling one strip gently until it parts with almost no struggle. He grimaces as if the cloth had betrayed him personally. In truth, it has only told the truth sooner than he wished. As morning grows, a pattern becomes clear. The lane has learned only the first half of yesterday's story. People have heard that white linen might bring more. They have not yet accepted that only good white linen will do so. That means the gate becomes a place of instruction as much as trade. You demonstrate strength. You reject hidden damp. You separate a bundle in front of its seller, so onlookers can see that one parcel may contain 3 values. This public sorting is not wasted time. It teaches the neighborhood what the mill now means. By the third or fourth cellar, fewer people are trying to pass overwashed weakness as fine stock. Instead, they begin to argue for middling rates more honestly, which is easier for everyone. The red-sashed intermediary returns before the sun stands high. He is empty-handed at first, which means he has come to learn before deciding where to steer his cloth. He asks whether yesterday's higher rate still holds. You say it does for certain linen, not for all pale bundles. He smiles slightly and says the rival mill paid high for almost anything white one morning, then tightened by the next. You tell him this yard tightened before the next, which is true enough. He says sellers dislike changing rules. You answer that paper dislikes changing quality. That pleases him more than you expect. Perhaps because it sounds like a principle. Perhaps because men who move goods enjoy hearing that even humble trades possess standards. He does not linger in debate. Instead, he produces, as if by accident, a smaller parcel from under his cloak, not concealed dishonestly, simply kept away from the damp air and crowd. Inside are shirt backs, collar strips, and a few lengths of household linen better than anything else yet offered this morning. Not as fine as yesterday's remarkable bundle. Still very serviceable. He says these came from a bookseller's household and a clerk's lodging nearby. That may be true. The cloth has the look of indoor use rather than market labor. There are ink-thinned marks at one cuff edge, a little starch stiffness still surviving in one seam. You pay the better rate without much haggling. He notices that too. This is how relationships are built in obscure industries. Not by friendliness, by repeated recognition of what quality feels like. When he leaves, he says he may have more by tomorrow if the neighborhood responds. There is promise inside that sentence, and threat as well. Supply follows confidence. If the mill seems uncertain, confidence drifts elsewhere. The morning continues in this narrower, sharper way. Fewer crowds than yesterday, better informed sellers, more pieces examined in public, less careless waste of coin. The overseer comes through earlier than before and stands by the gate without speaking for some time. You know what he is doing, not doubting every act, testing whether yesterday taught you the right lesson. A worker is trusted more after being watched and found deliberate. That is not comfort exactly, but it is steadier than suspicion. When a servant from the large house uphill returns, carrying another cleared bundle, you feel the lane itself paying attention. This is the house from which the stones came. She knows that you know that she knows. No one says it aloud. She sets the parcel down and waits. The knot is simpler this time. The cloth within is mixed but honest. No hidden weight. Some fine napkin linen, some worn shifts. A little curtain cloth too weak for good stock. You sort it fairly and pay for what deserves paying. Then you place the useless pieces aside in full view. She watches this, then says, almost shyly, that the kitchen mistress was told the mill noticed the first bundle's trick. So the warning reached home after all. You say only that the scale notices many things. She gives the smallest hint of a smile. Trust in such places is often built by surviving embarrassment without turning it into insult. After she goes, the overseer asks whether the linen from that house still merits caution. You say yes, but also attention. A seller corrected once may become more useful than one who was never tested. He nods at that, and you sense another small shift, not praise, something quieter. The acceptance that your memory of cloth and cellar is becoming part of the mill's memory too. By late morning, the buying has steadied into a pattern the yard can hold. No flood today, no lane clogged with animals. Instead, a measured stream of better chosen bundles, enough to keep the wash side occupied without overwhelming it. This is almost ideal, though ideal conditions in work rarely announce themselves. You only recognize them because your breathing is easier and the piles remain distinct. The clerk passes once and notes that fewer higher rate marks have appeared on the board. You tell him the stronger standards are helping. He says stricter buying is always cheaper than stricter excuses. Then he walks on, pleased with his own line. Still, he is not wrong. At midday, before food, you are called to the loft. The first improved sheets from yesterday are dry enough for closer handling now. This is the moment wet hope becomes something near a fact. You climb the stair with a strange mix of readiness and reluctance. Paper never looks quite the same dry as it did hanging. Air settles some promises and breaks others. In the loft, the hanging rows from the special charge have softened into a paler, quieter finish. The loft woman has already taken down part of the clean run and laid it flat in small counted groups. You move to them and lift the top sheet. Now the surface tells its story plainly. It is smoother than the mill's recent ordinary work. Not perfect. There are still slight variations if you tilt it to the light, but the face is cleaner, the fiber more even. The sheet receives the eye calmly. That is as valuable as brightness alone. Paper intended for writing should not distract the hand that uses it. It should lie there and accept ink. You run your fingers over the dry sheet very lightly. Too much touch leaves oil. The loft woman says the better ones dried flat, with little curling. That matters. Curling can make fine paper seem temperamental, and buyers dislike temper in objects. A stack of the downgraded pieces lies nearby. Compared to the cleaner run, their defects are clearer now. The dark flecks matter more in dryness. The rougher patching catches light badly. You are relieved that they were removed early. A weaker judgment yesterday would now be visible as dishonesty. The overseer arrives while you are still comparing the groups. He asks first for the count of fine sheets fit to show. The loft woman gives the number. It is lower than the broadest hope, but comfortably above disappointment. Then he asks how many fell to ordinary grade. She tells him that too. He seems satisfied, though not indulgent. This is how a successful day often feels in workshop life. Not celebratory, merely justified. The clerk comes with him and begins counting with more care than the loft usually receives. His fingertips barely touch the corners. He separates the best sheets from the merely good. The difference is slight, but he wants it marked. A government copyist, if one comes, should not be shown almost the best. He should be shown the best, then the next best if needed. Hierarchy exists inside even a successful batch. That is another quiet truth of making things. The better your product becomes, the finer your distinctions must become too. As the piles are sorted, the clerk asks where these sheets should be kept until any inspection. Not in the common stack room, the overseer says. Too much movement there. Not in the office either, where lamp soot and handling might touch them. The loft woman suggests the upper chest by the south shutter, usually reserved for drier selected stock waiting for sizing. It is clean enough, cool enough, out of careless reach. The overseer agrees. You help carry the selected sheets there in low bundles, wrapped in plain cloth. No ceremony. Yet the act feels ceremonial simply because it separates them from the rest of the mill's ordinary flow. They are no longer only paper. They are expectations stored flat. The day below continues while this happens. You can hear it through the floorboards. Water moving. A trough lid set down. Someone dragging a basket across stone. The better batch has not stopped the life of the mill. It has only inserted a finer thread into that life. Soon you are back in the lower rooms, because cloth keeps arriving and yesterday's purchases still need handling. This is one of the gentlest corrections history offers to pride. A single improved product does not cancel routine. Someone still has to trim cords. Someone still has to separate grease-marked household cloth from strong shirt linen. Someone still has to stand in sour damp and judge whether a piece can become anything useful at all. You return to that work more calmly now. Not because the stakes vanished, but because one uncertainty has become evidence upstairs. The cloth from the bookseller's quarter washes well, not brilliantly, well. A few inked traces survive too deep and are set aside. The rest prove honest. That pleases you. The intermediary's parcel was what it seemed. Such confirmations matter. Trust in the rag trade is always provisional, but every accurate bundle makes the next bargain easier. By mid-afternoon, there is talk from the front lane. Not loud talk, a different kind. Someone of some standing has paused at the gate and spoken with the clerk. You hear this first from the yard boy, who always knows a quarter of everything. He says it was a stationer's assistant, or perhaps a bookseller's man, or perhaps a scribe's servant. He cannot hold the facts still long enough to hand them over cleanly. You tell him to carry the cut stock where it belongs and let the adults confuse the story properly. He grins and obeys. Still, the air shifts. Rumor becoming footstep has a different weight. Near the close of afternoon, the clerk calls for the overseer and then for the selected sheets from the south chest. Not all of them, only a few. That tells you enough. Someone has come to look, if not to buy. You are not invited to the office, which is natural. A rag picker rarely enters the final conversation between paper and money, but you pass nearby with a basket and catch fragments through the lattice. The visitor's voice is educated and tired, the kind of tiredness that comes from desks rather than lifting. He asks about sizing, about surface, about whether the stock feathers under ink. The overseer answers plainly. The clerk adds figures. A sheet is moved. Another. Silence follows each handling. That silence means judgment. You keep walking, because pausing would be childish, but the little you heard settles warmly in you. The questions are the questions of writing people, not merchants asking only weight and count, people who care how paper receives a pen. Later, when the visitor leaves, the clerk is careful not to reveal too much. That itself reveals plenty. He says only that a man connected with copying work wished to see recent output. Not a government copyist directly, perhaps. Not yet. But near enough to that world that the visit matters. That evening the mill does not celebrate. The visitor's footsteps fade into the lane, and work goes on exactly as work always does. A basket still needs carrying. A line still needs checking. A damp lot still needs turning before night can settle into it. That is one of the truest things about labor like yours. Good signs arrive quietly, and they do not excuse the next task. The clerk keeps the better sheets near him for a while, then returns them to the chest in the loft. He wraps them more carefully this time, not because paper has changed, but because its possible future has. You notice that small change at once. People handle an object differently the moment they imagine someone important touching it later. A sheet that was merely good enough for trade becomes something to be guarded from dust, from bent corners, from thoughtless fingers. And yet it is still made from collar strips, cuffs, napkin linen, and the worn remains of other people's domestic order. That fact stays with you. The cleaner the paper appears, the more easily the world forgets where it began. By sunset, the overseer asks for one more count, not of money now, and not of incoming rag, of the selected sheets themselves. How many are fit for showing? How many are fit only for sale? How many are to be held back because a flaw might become visible in stronger light? You stand nearby while the loft woman and the clerk go through them again. The best sheets make a soft, dry sound as they are lifted and stacked. The lesser ones sound almost the same. That is what makes judgment difficult. Failure in a mill is often subtle. A black fleck no larger than a seed, a roughness that will catch a pen point, a thinness near the edge that only appears when the sheet is raised to the window. The clerk counts with his lips moving silently. The loft woman counts by touch, as much as sight. You count in memory, comparing this stack to the little basket you set aside yesterday, when the cloth was still only cloth. The final number is respectable, not rich, not abundant, but enough that a buyer could see consistency rather than accident. That matters more than a single perfect sheet. One fine page may be luck. A small stack of fine pages suggests a method. The overseer says the same in fewer words. He says that if another man from the copying trade comes, he must be shown a group, not a sample. The clerk agrees. Then he glances toward you and says that tomorrow's buying should favor the same sort of indoor linen if it can be had without foolish spending. Indoor linen. It is not a formal category. Still, everyone understands. Cloth from houses where writing happens. Cloth worn by clerks, copyists, booksellers, schoolmen, officials, or the servants around them. less kitchen grease, less stable dust, less hard labor ground into the weave. The city begins to divide itself differently in your mind after that, not only rich and poor, not only clean and dirty, but according to the likely future of a rag. Some neighborhoods make better paper before anyone there knows they do. You go back down to the yard before dark and stand among the remaining bundles with this new map in your head. The coarse stack is still large. It will always be large. The world produces more humble cloth than fine. But now you look at each tied parcel and wonder not merely what grade it is, but what room it came from, what window, what table, what kind of hands wore it smooth. A house servant passing with the refuse of an accounting room can alter the mill more than a whole donkey load of kitchen rags. The thought is almost comforting. The city is hidden inside the yard, but not lost. As the last light leaves the upper wall, the overseer joins you there. He does not speak at once. He looks at the stacked bundles under cover, then toward the loft where the selected sheets rest. At last he says that if the copying trade truly takes interest, the mill will need steadier quality, not merely one fortunate day. You say yes. There is no clever answer to that. He asks whether the neighborhood can supply it. This time you do not answer too quickly, because this is the real question now, larger than one batch and larger than your own pride in having chosen well. Can the quarter support the promise the mill would like to make? Can a small yard, fed by peddlers, servants, widows, intermediaries, and chance, produce enough strong pale linen to satisfy people who write for a living? You tell him the truth. Some days, yes. Every day, perhaps not. He seems to value that answer more than confidence would have pleased him. He says the mill must learn the same lesson as the rag picker, to separate what can honestly be offered from what must remain ordinary. Then he leaves you to the coverings and cord. That sentence stays in your hands while you work. To separate what can honestly be offered, it is the trade in one line. Not only the trade of rag picking, the trade of the whole mill. The making of paper from salvage cloth is a long practice of separation. Button from shirt, dry from damp. Strong from weak, fine from common. Showable from merely saleable. And in each act of separation there is also mercy, not because the lesser material is worthless, only because it should not pretend to be something finer than it is. Night deepens. The gate is barred again. The lane outside quiets. When you eat with less hunger and more tiredness than yesterday. That is different. Yesterday hunger came from exertion and uncertainty. Tonight tiredness comes from sustained attention. Your body is sore in familiar places, but your mind is still moving among bundles, rates, and possible futures. At the low table where workers gather, one man says the paper mill has had a visitor, so word has moved out almost at once. You shrug and say only that some men come to look and some leave without buying. He laughs and asks which sort this one was. You answer that he looked carefully. That is enough to satisfy him. Most trades understand that careful looking is a kind of payment in advance, even when no money appears at once. Back in your room, the thought of tomorrow no longer feels vague. It has shape now. The red-sashed intermediary may return. The servant from the large house may come again. Other sellers may have heard that the mill is strict, but still willing to pay for true quality. And somewhere beyond the quarter, perhaps in a bookseller's stall or a copy room, a man is speaking of the smoother sheets he handled this afternoon, not praising them too highly perhaps, only mentioning them. That is often how change begins, not with proclamation, with one careful person saying, almost idly, that a certain small mill's recent paper was better than expected. You sleep more quickly this time. The day has left less unfinished inside you. Yet when morning comes, it brings not relief, but continuation. The yard opens, the scale is set out. The first cold of dawn rests in the metal weights. You touch them one by one. Their heaviness is familiar now, in a way almost soothing. Outside, the lane starts slowly. No crush today, just a few early sellers, each carrying what they hope will pass, A woman brings shirt strips wrapped in old veil cloth. A boy comes with table linen cut down from a coffee house. An old man offers a mixed sack from lodgings where students rented cheap rooms. That one interests you at once. Cheap rooms still hold writing. Cheap rooms still wear cuffs thin on desks. You sort carefully and find just enough good linen among the poor cloth to justify his walk. By mid-morning, the yard has become exactly what the overseer hoped for and feared. Not crowded, selective. The flow of rags is narrower now, but more useful. You reject more openly than before. You also pay with less hesitation when a lot deserves it. The lane learns, the mill learns, and slowly, almost too slowly to notice from within the work itself, your own place in the process changes. Other workers begin calling you to look before a doubtful bundle is mixed. The wash side asks which stack of pale but brittle cloth should join. The clerk asks who supplied a certain lot rather than assuming all rags are alike once bought. These are small things. Still, small things are how status moves in workshops. No speech announces it. No coin marks it. A worker simply becomes someone whose judgment is consulted. Near noon, the red-sashed intermediary does return. This time he brings two smaller parcels instead of one broad sack. That is a sign of adaptation. He has learned that mixed bulk will no longer charm the gate. The first parcel is merely good. The second is better. Not extraordinary. Not the hidden treasure of the earlier household bundle, but steady, dry, white enough, and strong. He says, more houses with clerks are clearing old chests now that word has spread. Perhaps he is flattering you. Perhaps he is flattering the mill. Perhaps he is simply reporting what trade has begun to do around him. You buy the better parcel at the improved rate. Then he says, almost carelessly, that the copying man who visited yesterday asked whether similar paper could be had again within days, not months. That is the real news. It enters the yard quietly, but it changes the air at once. Within days, not months. That means the first visit was not idle curiosity. It means someone handling paper for written work wants to know whether quality can be repeated, and repeated quality depends on your side of the mill as much as any other. You ask how he knows this. He says he heard it from a stationer's apprentice who heard it from the clerk's own conversation at the shop. That may be embroidery. Still, it is close enough to truth to matter. You say nothing dramatic. You only finish weighing the linen and mark the board. But inwardly the sentence settles. Within days. The mill does not need a miracle now. It needs consistency. That is harder. Miracles belong to chance. Consistency belongs to routine under pressure. When the overseer hears the report, he does not smile. He simply asks the clerk whether enough good stock is now in hand for another improved run. The clerk says, perhaps, if ordinary production is not starved. You are called to give your judgment. There is enough, you say, for a modest better batch if tomorrow also brings similar cloth. Not enough if the mill tries to force ambition past supply. The overseer accepts this. So the next decision is made with less drama than the first. A second improved batch will be attempted only if the gate can support it honestly. No padding, no pretending, no sudden hunger for fine paper that ignores what the yard can really provide. You feel relief at that. The worst fate for careful work is to inspire greed faster than discipline. Afternoon passes in the old familiar rhythm. Shake, spread, trim, sort, carry. Yet, beneath the repetition, there is a new steadiness. The mill is no longer guessing whether better rag selection matters. It has seen the result. Now it must discover whether that result can become habit. The first selected stock for a second finer charge begins to gather in a covered basket by the wall. Smaller than you wish, cleaner than usual. A beginning, nothing more. You add to it, piece by piece, a shirt back from the student lodgings, a napkin strip from the uphill house, honest this time, a collar facing from the intermediary's parcel, a neat white fragment from a bookseller's home. The basket becomes a map of trust. Not only cloth, sources, patterns, lessons learned. Late in the day, the clerk comes from the office carrying one of the better dry sheets from the chest. He does not hand it around. He simply holds it by the edges and tells the overseer that the visitor sent word through the stationer. The surface was judged suitable, not perfect, suitable. There may be a request for a small quantity if the next run matches it closely enough. That is all. No contract, no promise of wealth, just the possibility of a small repeated order. Suitable. You like the word at once. It is modest and exact. The sort of word a copyist would trust more than praise. Suitable means the paper did what it was supposed to do. It took ink. It held itself. It did not embarrass the hand that used it. For a mill like this, built on salvage and repetitive correction, suitable is almost a blessing. The overseer asks how small a quantity. The clerk names it. Not much. Enough for certain copying needs. Enough to matter. Enough to tighten expectation without transforming the mill into something grander than it is. That may be the best outcome possible. A small demand can be taught. A large one can distort everything. As evening comes again, the consequence settles all through the building. The wash side grows a little more attentive. The beating room asks more often where a lot came from. The loft woman says the south chest will have to be cleaned fully if selected stock is to be kept there more often. Even the yard boy begins boasting that he can tell strong linen by touch, though he plainly cannot yet. The mill remains itself, still damp, still cramped, still dependent on whatever the quarter casts off, but now its quiet, lowest labor has become more visible. You feel that most strongly when the clerk, of all people, asks you before sunset whether the morning gate should be opened a little earlier tomorrow, in case the better suppliers come first. Such a question would not have been asked a few days ago. The gate was once merely the mouth of the yard. Now it is the beginning of quality control, though no one there would use such polished words. You tell him yes, open a little earlier. The best bundles often move before the lane is crowded. He nods, as if this too belongs in his book. Perhaps it does. At the end of the shift, when the gate is barred and the scale wiped, you stand a moment longer than usual in the cooling yard. Nothing around you looks transformed. The coarse stack still leans where it leaned, the hook still hangs on its peg, the cistern still smells faintly of yesterday's soap and today's rinse water. From the loft above comes no glow now, only darkness behind shutters. And yet the whole place feels altered by a thread so fine an outsider might miss it entirely. A smoother sheet upstairs, a stricter bargain at the gate, a visitor who asked the right questions, a possible order, small and exacting, all of it resting on whether tomorrow's bundles contain real strength or only pale disguise. You think of the paper already sleeping in the south chest. You think of the second basket beginning by the wall. You think of the city beyond the gate full of cupboards, trunks, rag chests, servants' bundles, students' shirts, clerks' collars, widows' sacks, peddlers' tricks, and the endless worn fabric of ordinary life. Somewhere in all that, tomorrow's paper is already fraying at the elbow, already thinning at the cuff, already waiting to be sold by someone who does not know what hand may later write upon it. You cover the last stack. You test the gate bar once more. You put the hook where it belongs. The yard grows still. The mill is quiet now. The tools are where they belong. The selected linen is where it belongs. The better sheets are flat in their chest. And you, for the moment,